This is Books for Breakfast, a podcast where we talk about books and writing. I'm Enda Wiley.
And I'm Peter Sir.
And you're all very welcome to this morning's show.
On today's show, we meet author Mary Costello and talk to her about A Beautiful Loan, her wide-ranging and intense new novel following a woman's life and relationships. Mary featured on Books for Breakfast before when her collection of short stories Barcelona was published. So we're very glad to welcome her back with her latest. So put on a big pot of coffee and sit back and listen to the 91st episode of Books for Breakfast.
My name is Anna, and for some time now I have been trying to account for certain events in my life, my adult life that is, which, from this vantage point of 45 years, I often find baffling. By events, I do not necessarily or only mean actual events, or indeed specific actions or deeds, all of which are evidence-based, and which we might regard as the historical data of an individual's life. I mean also that I am trying to understand what went on in my mind over 2 decades, the miasma of thought, of appetites and instincts, the little tremors of fear or shame, all those inner movements and emanations, those dimly perceived undercurrents that have agency over external actions and events. The climate of the psyche, I might call this, the tropisms of the mind, the subtle vibrations of the soul that affect and, in some instances, determine the outcomes that constitute the historical data. Does man, as Carl Jung believed, draw towards him those outward events that his inner orientation demands? How to understand all this, then, that is my purpose. How to understand why we do what we do, or tolerate what we tolerate, or love who we love.
And that was Mary Costello reading from A Beautiful Loan, her new novel just published by Canongate. I've been lucky enough to attend all of Mary's launches to date and of course to read and to immerse myself in her work from her short story collection The China Factory, published in 2012, right up to the recent new novel. And I've always been inspired by the depth of her work, the power of her imagination and her attention to the detail of the worlds her writing enters with such great intelligence and heart. Her debut short story collection I just mentioned, The China Factory, was nominated for the Guardian First Book Award and shortlisted for an Irish Book Award. Her first novel, Academy Street, which came out in 2014, won the Irish Novel of the Year award at the Irish Book Awards and was named overall Irish Book of the Year and was shortlisted for several awards, including the International Dublin Literary Award, the Costa First Novel Prize, and has been translated into several languages.
Her critically acclaimed second novel, The River Capture, which came out in 2019, was shortlisted for the Irish Book Awards, the Kerry Novel of the Year, the Dalkey Novel Award, and her second short story collection, Barcelona, which came out in 2024, and in fact, which Anna and I spoke to Mary about before on Books for Breakfast, was an Irish Times bestseller. She's received many fine reviews so far for A Beautiful Loan, such as that by John Self, who wrote, Costello is one of Ireland's greatest writers.
So the novel begins in 1985. Anna is 19 years old. She's a young teacher, just qualified. She meets an older man, Peter Gallagher, and she's innocent, she's naive, she's quiet. She quickly becomes obsessed with him, eventually marries him, and she's needy in her love for him. But he's distant, he's rational, he goes hill walking every weekend with his friends. He's leaving her alone during this time. And the novel charts, I think, loneliness within a marriage, betrayal and deep hurts. But as readers, and I just want to say, welcome, Mary Costello. You're very welcome to the breakfast table. But as readers, certainly I felt I couldn't help wondering, why is she tolerating all of this? And as the novel progresses, Anna begins to wonder this too. And as she says in the prologue, which you just read there, she's trying to understand, why do we do what we do, or tolerate what we tolerate, or love who we love. So Mary Costello, as I said, you're very welcome. And could you talk a little bit about this? Why is she tolerating what she's tolerating, really? You know?
Well, I think she, as you said, she meets Peter when she's 19, just fresh out of college. And she is quite enthralled to him. You know, he's an older man, he's more sophisticated, he's well-travelled, he's smart. And she looks up to him. And I think that's not uncommon. Also, I think the the thing about Anna is she comes from a fairly loving, safe family. Her background is sheltered, I would say, sheltered really. She grew up in the country. Her parents it's a stable but safe and sheltered background. So it's a sort of as she gets older, I think she looks back on it and sees it as a kind of Eden, hankering back to that innocent time of her life. Also, very significantly, she has quite a tender relationship with her father. There are quite poignant moments in it. She sees his vulnerabilities. He can be cross at times and angry, but she also understands him. So in Jungian terms, she would have what we call a positive father complex. So, she's projecting a lot of her father's traits onto every man she meets, and Peter is the main man. So we all do this when we fall in love, by the way. We project the better self onto the person. We project, all of the positive traits that we enjoy and we love and that we have experienced ourselves. So as relationships mature, we have to withdraw the projections and see the real person. And of course, as Anna withdraws the projections, it becomes obvious that Peter is colder and he is not like her father. But at that stage, she has married him. But significantly too, and this becomes clearer later on as Anna gets older and as she enters therapy, she goes into analysis later on, and it becomes clear that actually, even though he can be cold and cruel at times, this relationship, and this was unconscious on Anna's part, this relationship facilitates her to have a lot of time alone. She is not lonely, but she is a solitary person. So he's away a lot, and it actually gives her time to pursue the reading and the study and the life of the mind. So unconsciously, she's actually, it might not be obvious to readers in the beginning, but actually she's getting what she wants unconsciously. There is a price to pay.
Yeah, that's right. And it's so interesting to hear you talk about the novel, and we really enjoyed reading it. I was wondering, would you read the opening section of how she meets Peter, because you spoke there about her father as well, and it touches on that as well, her very special relationship with her father. So I'd love to hear that if you could read it for us.
So this is the opening couple of pages just after the prologue. So we're now back at the beginning of the story, really. His name is Peter. I can barely hear him above the din in the nightclub. I frown and shake my head and point to my ear, and am about to move away when he says something in Irish that I do not fully catch, but which seems to indicate defeat or retreat. Something a parent or teacher might say before moving on to the next child, something like Mahan Colleen. Whatever the words, the switch to Irish piques my interest, and I reply in kind, in barely adequate Irish. There follows a rudimentary exchange, half shouted at each other's heads. Cadas anamdich, Carabasthu, Cer the Hugan Shahu, Cain Ober a Thogat Fain. And then, Cain Ishu, Onya. 19, I say. I'll soon be 20. How can you be finished college and a teacher at 19? He asks. My mother sent me to school at 3. She wanted rid of me. I don't believe that for a second, he says. Agus tú féin a feather, cén ish who? Guess, he says. And I guess 26, 27. Close, he says. After a few minutes, we revert to English. He is originally from Donegal and retains a touch of that warm, precise accent. Handsome, too, the more attention I pay, with brown eyes and clear, unblemished skin. Later, I will identify the moment he uttered those words in Irish as the moment that came to shape my life. My longing to be with him starts immediately and is relentless. From the payphone in the hall outside my bedsit in Phibsborough, I dial his number over and over, and finally he answers. On Saturday night, he takes me to a barbecue at his friend's house on the south side of the city. The weather is balmy, and I wear a yellow summer dress and white sandals. In the back garden, Mike, the host, tends the barbecue, turning steaks and potatoes wrapped in tinfoil. His wife, Alison, pours me wine. I try to remember the names, Con and Maeve, Pat and Michelle, Jane, Richie. I can feel their eyes on me. They've known each other for years, perhaps since university. Some of them have children and babysitters at home. Maeve has been to a kibbutz. I think this is a kind of cooperative farm in Israel, where young people go to work or volunteer. Con says something to Peter, or perhaps about Peter, that I cannot catch, and they all laugh. At Peter's expense, I think, or maybe mine. I drink the wine quickly, and Alison refills my glass. Peter moves off down the garden, and I am not sure if I should follow him. I remain alone for a while until Alison returns, and I am so grateful and so nervous that I unleash a torrent of talk and gratitude. But soon, again, I am on my own. I drink more wine. There are lights on in the upstairs bedrooms of the houses backing onto the garden, and I narrow my eyes like I used to do as a child, until the lights blur and blend and double, and I feel dizzy and drunk. Suddenly I miss home. My father and mother, my brother and sister will be in the kitchen, watching TV now. Ordinary life, there and everywhere, happening without me. Back in my bedsit, the book I was reading earlier lies open on the table. The thought of it makes me less lonely. It has a black cover with a purple vertical stripe, and is not so much a book, I think now, as some gently living thing. Poems 1955 to 1959 and an essay in autobiography. There is a photograph of the author, Boris Pasternak, on the front cover. He is wearing a belted overcoat and a cap, and he looks so ordinary, so rural, like the men I know from home, even like my father. He has an anguished look on his face, and he holds his hand to his heart as if he is pleading or appealing to someone. I know he has suffered. One night, years ago, long before I knew who Boris Pasternak was, my father and I watched Dr. Zhivago on TV. It was late, and my brother and sister were in bed, and my mother was moving around the house, absorbed in her chores. My father and I forgot each other for a long time, and then, towards the end, I looked over at him, and there were tears running down his face.
Thank you for reading that, Mary. I'm reminded that I have that exact Pasternak edition behind me on my shelf, and I remember reading, kind of noting that as I was reading the novel. But I was thinking, I mean, because listening to you read there, I mean, obviously, like, we're very much inside Anna's head, you know, kind of throughout this, we're in her mind as she's trying to understand her life, and I'm sort of interested in you know, how you as a writer go about chronicling her inner life, and as you said in that prologue, the inner movements and emanations, or the climate of the psyche. And that kind of, again, because we'll come back to Jung, I suppose, later on, but described in the prologue. But I just wondering, how did you approach this as a writer? Was it difficult? Did you find yourself drawing on your own experiences, for instance? I mean, or did you have to invent the whole? I mean, I'm just kind of, you know, just kind of getting into her mind like that. It's such a striking achievement, I think.
I suppose, like many writers, I do draw on aspects of my own life. It is a novel, so some things are turned up, some are turned down, and some of them are invented. But one of the things I think that I remember James Coetzee saying that all writing is autobiographical, fiction and non-fiction, because you do have to create out of the material in your own mind. So it is my mind. It isn't my life necessarily, but it is my mind. And even when I was writing The River Capture, you know, the thing about Luke, he's a 33-year-old bisexual man. I'm a middle-aged straight woman. But the mind, what occupies him or what occupied me, I write about what's obsessing me and what's distressing me or what's consuming me. So if I'm reading things or if I'm watching or listening to music, they eventually make their way into the work. But in writing Anna, I was tracking very closely every moment, you know, when you write in the present tense and when there's only that one character, and in this case it's written from the first person, so it's very immediate and very close. And if I'm, you know, thinking of her at a barbecue in summertime, but her mind is back in her bedsit. It isn't that hard just to stay very present in that moment and just be very honest to the thought that comes into her mind. I think it's very minute, but it has to be very honest about each unfolding moment.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most striking features of the novel is that kind of, it's a quiet. There's something quiet but intense. It's a quiet kind of intensity that's with us as readers the whole time, as we're made aware of as you call it, the climate of Anna's psyche kind of there, very much present throughout it.
Yeah, I was really aware of that listening to you read that piece as well, Mary. It's striking. Peter used the word striking, the way you shift so seamlessly to where her book Back at Home and what she's thinking there. And I thought you said it's minute, but it's so effective. So it is a great achievement. So thanks for reading that piece. And yet, go on.
I think that one of the things that I do always want to create with the characters is to convey the sense of individual, the sense of personal isolation that we all have, to convey that, internal isolation, while also trying to convey the human need for unity or the human need for contact. Now, not all the characters succeed in finding that human need for, unity with somebody. Maybe the partner or the lover or the whatever doesn't meet those needs. And sometimes the characters will find that connection through art or through religion or something else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you used the word, what you're obsessed about or what you're interested in. And Anna, she does have her obsessions, and for all the loneliness of her marriage to Peter, she, as you said earlier, embraces her time alone. She revels in her solitude at weekends when Peter is off about his walking, and it's very much her time to read and to think. So she's an interesting character because she herself has strong passions, and they're vying for attention. On the one hand, her need and her love for Peter, and on the other hand, her obsession with reading and her inner world. So it must have been very interesting to work on that, and to write it. Yeah,
I think, like I was saying, my passions are, I think it's the case for many writers, they make their way in. So when I first started writing, I used to be a bit hesitant, or, actually I didn't often include, if a character might be reading something or listening to music or whatever, and I didn't always put it in, even though it was where the character would naturally go towards. And I was sort of censoring in a way. I was afraid people would think I was showing off or trying to, display my reading or whatever. But in actual fact, it was being dishonest in many ways to the character. Whereas now I actually go entirely where the character is. If something is with River Capture, I let rip because Joyce was a great love in my life and real to me. And so I let my character have him in the same way as I have him. And so it does feel a lot more honest then. So yeah, Anna's passions come through her. She's all the time trying to put her finger on something. She's all the time trying to live a more conscious life. And her way to become more conscious is through reading. Anna is all the time trying to live a more conscious life. And in order to become more conscious, she seeks out, whether it's Jung, especially Jung. And Jung is a fit. Carl Jung is a fit for Anna because he has an all-encompassing approach. She has a philosophical bent. She likes religion. She likes myth. So Jung delivers all of that. And more importantly, he gives her a route towards individuation, which is the growth of the self towards wholeness and towards consciousness.
Yeah, I thought that was great. It added huge depth to the story. And yet she does wonder, did she give too much precedence to the inner world to the detriment of her relationships? And in this sense, there is a very monastic element to her personality, isn't there? And it distances her from those she could be close to, and yet at the same time she wants to be distant in a way. So again, it's all those elements vying, within her. So it's really a novel about watching her mature and develop, and the Jungian element I thought was brilliant. But Peter, you wanted to ask Mary about the poets, because we are poets.
Well, the writers, and Young is a huge presence, but she's kind of obsessed. I mean, she's sort of obsessed with Peter in many ways. She later becomes quite obsessive, maybe about Karim, who's also her introduction to Islam, and she becomes quite obsessed with Islam at one point, very deeply involved with it, and she has those strong literary obsessions like Jake Mahan is there, Rilke is there. There's the enormous admiration for Camus and his writing, which is one of the kind of centres, and that's, so that's a very strong feature, and that relates to her relationship with Karim, because they're both Algerian and so on as well, different sides of the divide in some ways. And then she studies Jung, as Anna's saying, and she attends the Jungian psychoanalyst who helps her further along the journey of, as you say, of individuation and becoming conscious. So she's on a quest to seek knowledge, I suppose, to have a meaningful life. So you like Jung and Camus. I mean, have they also influenced your own work as a writer of this novel?
Definitely. I studied Jung in my 20s and 30s, and it was that sort of human urge to put my finger on something. As a child, I would, be quite interested in religion, and, I went to mass, and I was God-minded too, like Anna. And, I studied a little bit of philosophy, but it was Jung. When I came to Jung was a fit. He suited my sensibility. I loved everything to do. I entered analysis in my 30s for a few years, and again I went back to a different analyst in my 40s, not because there was any crisis necessarily, but I often say that if I go to the gym for my body, I don't, but then I should go to, if I can, whether it's afforded or have the time. It is a luxury, I'm very aware of that too, but if I can go to analysis from my mind, I do want to do that. I do want to turn over everything. It is living the examined life in many ways. That's what Anna's doing. But yeah, so Jung was a huge influence on me, and still is. It's, whether it's any philosophical or theological text I've ever read, none of it made sense the way Jung has made sense to me in my life. And I still talk about him in interviews, even recently in radio, when I was talking about this book, the consciousness issue came up, and how modern life conspires to keep us unconscious, and Jung himself said that, after the Second World War and after the bomb had been dropped and the concentration camps had been exposed and we had this Holocaust, and then the arms race and the Cold War. So in 1959, he was asked, are we heading towards World War III? Will man survive? And he said, man's survival depends on how much each individual becomes conscious. How much each person does the work.
But isn't that so striking now? I mean, when you think of where we are, you think of where we are in this world of AI, social media, the stuff that goes on with Trump and Iran, and the sheer lack of thought that dominates all of our discourse. You think, is kind of literature and Jung or analysis, ways of keeping us conscious and independent seem to be more important now than ever, but they're not there necessarily.
Absolutely. And that's why it comes back. He said that it depends on the work of each individual. And I myself say it certainly we're not going to survive because of nation states, because of missile defense systems or geopolitical alliances or regime change. That's for sure. So the unconsciousness is the blindness, and the biggest element of unconsciousness, and the most easily one that we can access, is our own shadow side, all our negative traits, which we project onto the other. And it happens within families. You'll often see somebody taking all the blame in a family, and that person is difficult. So they become like the scapegoat of Greek myth. They have to take everything on their shoulders, and they then live it out to fulfill their mission. But to get back to the current times, Jung said that if we don't recognize and integrate our own shadow rather than projecting it onto others and making others the enemy, and if, as we know, for 1,000 years, Jews were the ones that Europe projected its shadow side on Jews, and they were humiliated and persecuted and dehumanized and outcasts for 1,000 years, culminating in the industrial extermination. Now, tragically, Europe and the West is projecting its shadow side onto others, onto migrants and Muslims and Palestinians and anybody that isn't white. I think that's the way it is. And we are in a very unconscious state time. And it does depend on each individual. You know, I spent the morning writing to government ministers about Shannon. You know, every small thing that I can do to just raise consciousness, not my job, but I can't not do it because there is this impulse. And actually, I think with Anna, getting back to Anna, one of the things that because she is a God-minded child and she becomes very interested in Islam especially, I now see that human impulse towards the divine, which is trying to put our finger on a higher note. Sometimes we get it through art. People in my first novel, Tess, she occasionally encountered that through Rilke's poetry or through being at Mass, hearing the liturgy, hearing choral music. She got glimpses of the numinous and the divine in those moments. They're the glimpses of consciousness that we all seek, that perfect unity and feeling of harmony with the cosmos almost. Well, Anna, I now associate that human impulse for the divine that we all have as a human impulse towards consciousness.
And one of the best ways, I suppose, of becoming conscious, developing a state of consciousness is through reading. So it was, I really enjoyed those sections in the book, particularly at the end when she's attending the psychoanalyst. I found that so interesting because she was reaching a different level as a human being. And it was exciting as a reader to get to that stage and to watch her develop like that. But I was thinking, reading the book as well, that animals and the often brutal treatment of them by humans, I mean, you've written about it before, it's frequently written about in your writing. In this novel, Anna loves her dog Boo, and she's really horrified, and so are we as readers, by Kareem's treatment of Boo and his insistence that the dog be housed outside, even in the cold. So animals and their rights matter so much to you too, Mary, don't they? And in the lives of your characters, such as Anna.
Yeah, for me, it's a very, very simple question. It's a question of mercy. Mercy for the weak, for the voiceless, the defenseless, the powerless. That's why, the ongoing genocide in Gaza has absolutely wiped me out, because they are voiceless, defenseless, stateless, powerless, and nobody lifts a finger to help them. So animals, I remember when I was reading Milan Kundera's The Unbearable Lightness of Being, towards the end, Teresa, the dog, is ill and the dog is to be put to sleep, he's dying. And I think it's Teresa, or Thomas, but I think it's Teresa has these thoughts which are Kundera's, which she says something like, mankind's true moral test will be in our treatment of those who are at our mercy. And she sees animals as the most ones at our mercy because they are completely powerless. And for me, it matters for everything. The animals, disabled people, migrants, the elderly, the Palestinians, whoever, those who have no voice and no power. And then it is our obligation, it is our responsibility to speak for them in many ways. We can't always succeed, but it is imperative. That's, to me, part of becoming conscious, to be aware that those without a voice. So when it comes to the animals, yes. And Kareem, he doesn't insist on anything, but she understands it. And it is one of the things towards the end of the novel, when Anna's in New York, it's not her marriage breakup or the loss of it, or any loss she's ever suffered or anything that she feels is her greatest sin. It is letting Boo be put outside. Now, I grew up on a farm. The dog always lived outside. But I couldn't countenance myself having a dog. In my life, I've had my dog sleep in the bedroom, so to countenance that for Anna is a shock for the reader, for sure. And with Kareem, Anna, getting back to what you were saying earlier, Peter, that she becomes enthralled and taken up very much by Islam as well. When she meets Kareem, he's very, very different to Peter. He is, a beautiful, sensitive soul. He's very gentle, and she sees the way he practices religion with great respect, with great patience, the way he cooks food. He has a real spiritual element to his life, and her interest is piqued by this, and she studies Islam and sees a lot of the beauty in it. Like all the world religions, it's not the teachings of the original prophets that is because most of them have the same basic tenets, which is love thy neighbour, do unto others. The real issue is, as in all world religions, the refusal of religions to extend compassion beyond the dogma, beyond the man-made rules, beyond the interpretations. And this eventually is what Anna comes to see as well, But for a while, it gives order to her life. And she likes that small concentration. It's like being alone and concentrating on a text or whatever. She likes homing in on something and finding something at its core, that she can put her finger on and that delivers peace. Like with the relationship with Peter and Kareem and Islam and her books, everything counts towards her growing consciousness. It's all part of the individuation journey. And we know that it will continue after we've left Anna. The road to, or the path of individuation, the process of becoming conscious, is never ending. It goes on, and maybe even after the body has given up, it goes on. We don't know,
Which is a brilliant idea. So mercy and empathy, it's a great thing to think about this morning at the breakfast table. And thanks for that, Mary.
I was just going to say, because it's clear as we listen to you speak about the work, but also about life. In your life as a writer, but also as a human being, there's a great kind of moral passion. And I know you've spoken, for instance, you've said about, and you've referred to kind of Palestinians and Gaza and so on, and you've said, I think, in an interview that you find that paralyzing as a writer to be able to. You've said that you have been unable to write when faced with that kind of cataclysm, that kind of particularly the destruction of Gaza and the killing of so many thousands of people, that you found it was like it just blocked you as a writer, as an imaginative kind of writer and a creative writer.
It has. Yeah, you're right. I've used the word paralysed and disabled me creatively from writing fiction anyway. I'm trying to write essays, in the intensity of it all, I do find it hard. So I take loads of notes and I watch it and listen to it. I'm totally immersed. But yeah, to go into a room and make up characters, I find I can't do that. Maybe it will return. I don't know, but it would seem terribly, I don't know, I'd be almost embarrassed, and I can't do it anyway, because as soon as I start to write or think about anything, this floods in and there's no escaping it. And I don't know that, and I think many people are like that. And in many ways, that is a sane reaction to a genocide. To be lukewarm about a genocide baffles me, and I have arguments with I'd say half my family feel as strongly as I do. The other half are getting on with it. They have jobs, they have families, they have mortgages. I understand all that. I absolutely do. But what really, I suppose, upset me and kind of really shocked me was the general apathy and indifference. I thought when this started, when the reaction to the atrocities of October 7th, when Israel started reacting, I thought the whole world would come out on the street. I had followed Israel's conduct towards Palestinians for about 30 years, so the conduct of Israel didn't surprise me. What surprised me was the level of slaughter and depravity and lies that the West was willing to tolerate from Israel. That's what surprised me. And what surprised me is that we in the West have enabled it. Yes, what happens in Sudan and Myanmar are awful, appalling as well, but they're not done in our name specifically. In this case, it's done with we have enabled it. When I say we, I mean we in the West, done in our name. And that's the hard thing to really reconcile. And I am, perplexed that, and there are no two sides in a genocide. There are only victims, and we have it well recorded and deemed a genocide. So it would, we know what's happening, and there was no getting away from it. It's there before our eyes, and nobody lifted a finger to stop it.
Sure.
It's ongoing too. It's a slow genocide now. So I say nobody lifts a finger to stop it.
No, that's so true.
Well said, Mary. Oh my God, the world we live in. And so the best we can do is show empathy, show kindness, even in minute ways, And well done to you for writing those letters this morning before you came on as well. And reading a novel like yours, I think, makes us pay attention more to the world, because it is about paying attention, isn't it? Not just living in our own little bubble, and that we look outwards. And so I'd like to thank you, Mary Costello, for coming to the breakfast table this morning. We really enjoyed, I mean, we covered a lot of ground there. I have to say that I ultimately, at the end of it, to go back to the bit that you read, and I was wondering, I wouldn't mind asking you this question. Do you believe that, as the novel suggests, that childhood is the only time where we are ever really fully known?
I think with Anna's father, she certainly has that beautiful, tender relationship with her. But childhood is a kind of prelapsarian in Eden in a way. And I remember once I gave a reading in Paris way back when China Factory came out, and a man in the audience stood up and he said, "You must have had a very difficult childhood," because it was troubled characters, and I didn't at all. In my case, I look back and see this kind of a stable, safe shelter too. But anyway, one of the things is that all childhoods in many ways are ruptured, because there's the rupture of leaving Eden, and the cost of becoming conscious always involves some pain. So we can stay in the Eden, but that's an unconscious state as well. To become conscious, there's always some pain, there's always some transition, there's always a loss of something, a death of some part of the psyche. To become conscious, you have to lose some things too.
Thank you very much, Mary. And it's been so interesting talking to you. We'll have to leave it there, unfortunately. But many thanks to Mary Costello for coming to the breakfast table this morning to talk to us about A Beautiful Loan, published by Canongate Books, all details of which will be available on all the usual sites. Peter, you have to help me here technically, but definitely on www.booksforbreakfast.buzzsprout.com. So thank you, Mary Costello. I think we've reached the end of our Books for Breakfast podcast this morning. I'm definitely rushing off to have more coffee, and I'm Enda Wiley, and I have Peter Sir here with me. And Peter, would you like to tell everyone about the details of the podcast if they'd like to listen again?
Well, you can subscribe at all the usual sources, Google and Apple and so on. And if you want to check out the notes that go along with this podcast, you can go to booksforbreakfast.buzzsprout.com. And yeah, so
we'll be back again. We'll have the toast on, we'll have the kettle boiling, we will have more books to discuss, and we're looking forward to having you here. So goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.